I never thought I'd become invisible in my own home. Just last Saturday, I stepped inside quietly, hoping for a moment of peace, but instead, I heard my granddaughter's soft sobs drifting from the balcony, while my son's drunken laughter echoed through the night from the living room. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up in my cramped New York City apartment, an aging building in Queens that's seen better days, its windows clouded with grime and the faint smell of city rain mixing with stale coffee. The creak of the old floorboards beneath my slippers is the first sound of my day. These same floorboards have witnessed 37 years of my life. They've absorbed my tears, my laughter, my countless steps rushing to help everyone except myself. My body aches from years of bending and giving love, money, and patience, but receiving nothing in return except silence or coldness. My arthritis reminds me every morning that I'm 72 years old, yet I still feel responsible for everyone else's happiness. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, still reach for my phone first thing, checking if Todd needs something. Again. That particular Saturday evening, I returned early from the grocery store on Northern Boulevard. The plastic bag swung from my wrist, heavier than usual because of the ingredients I'd bought to make Emma's favorite apple cinnamon pie. I'd spent almost $40 on organic apples, money I really couldn't spare from my modest Social Security check, but I wanted to surprise them. I imagined Emma's face lighting up, Todd maybe remembering how I used to bake for him when he was little. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my knees protesting with each step. The hallway smelled of Mrs. Chen's cooking from apartment 3B, garlic and soy sauce that reminded me how long it had been since I'd cooked a proper meal for myself. I always saved the good ingredients for when Todd and Emma visited. I put my key in the lock, turning it as quietly as possible. I didn't want to disturb anyone. That's become my default mode, trying not to disturb, trying not to be a burden, trying to make myself smaller and smaller until sometimes I wonder if I exist at all. But what I heard when I opened that door changed everything. Emma's soft whimpering came from the direction of the balcony. My heart clenched immediately. She's only 8 years old, and that sound, God, that sound was the kind of crying a child does when they've given up hope that anyone will comfort them. It was quiet desperation, the kind that breaks you from the inside. And from my living room came Todd's voice, loud and slurred, laughing at something one of his coworkers had said. "You should see my mom," he was saying, and my blood ran cold. "She'll do anything for us. Anything. It's almost too easy." The laughter that followed felt like glass cutting through my chest. I stood there in my own doorway, grocery bag still hanging from my wrist, and realized I was witnessing the truth about my life. The truth I'd been avoiding for years. My granddaughter was crying alone while my son mocked me to strangers. I set the groceries down on the small table by the door, the same table where I'd placed thousands of care packages over the years, bags full of food I'd bought with money I needed for my medications. My hands were shaking, and I had to grip the edge of that table to steady myself. The contrast between Emma's tears and Todd's abandon shattered something deep inside me that night. Something that had been cracking for years finally broke. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because it didn't happen overnight. This pain, this realization, it was built brick by brick, disappointment by disappointment, sacrifice by sacrifice. I remember when Todd was 8, the same age Emma is now. It was Halloween 1987, and every other kid in his class had store-bought costumes. But we didn't have money for that. His father had just lost his job at the plant in Long Island City, and I was working double shifts at the diner on Roosevelt Avenue just to keep our lights on. So I stayed up 3 nights in a row, sewing a pirate costume by hand. I used an old black shirt of his father's, cut it down, added patches from fabric scraps I'd been saving. I made him a hat from cardboard and painted it with cheap acrylic paint that made our little kitchen smell like chemicals for days. My fingers bled from pushing that needle through the thick fabric, but I didn't care. When Todd put on that costume and looked at himself in our cracked bathroom mirror, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Mom, I look like a real pirate," he said, and he hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. That hug, God, I lived on that hug for months. He won second place in the school costume contest that year. Second place with a costume that cost me less than $5 but took 3 sleepless nights and more love than I thought I had to give. That was Todd then. That was my son who hugged me and made me feel like the most important person in the world. But people change. Or maybe they just become more honest about who they really are. When Todd turned 16, his father and I were struggling to pay for his school supplies. Private school wasn't an option, we could barely manage the public school fees and transportation costs. But Todd wanted what his friends had. Designer sneakers, a leather jacket, a class ring that cost more than I made in 2 weeks. "Everyone else has these things, Mom," he'd say, standing in our tiny kitchen with that look of disappointment I was starting to recognize. "I don't want to look poor. So I picked up extra shifts. I worked 7 days a week for 3 months, coming home so tired I could barely microwave a frozen dinner. My feet swelled up so bad I had to soak them in ice water every night. I developed a cough that wouldn't go away, the stress and exhaustion were eating me alive. But I got Todd those sneakers. That jacket. That ring. And you know what he said when I gave them to him? Nothing. He just took them upstairs to his room like they were his due. Like I owed him these things. Like the sacrificing and the working and the bleeding I'd done to get them was invisible. That should have been my first warning. But love makes you deaf to warnings, doesn't it? Love makes you think that the next time will be different, that your kindness will eventually be seen, appreciated, returned. His father died when Todd was 22. Heart attack at 53. The stress, the doctor said. Years of worry and overwork had literally killed him. The funeral cost $8,000, money we didn't have. I had to take out loans, use credit cards, borrow from friends. Todd didn't contribute a single dollar. He said he was too emotional to deal with financial matters. But he wasn't too emotional to ask me for money 3 weeks later. His rent was due, he said. He'd lost his job, again, and needed help just until he got back on his feet. Just this once, he promised. Just this once became twice. Twice became monthly. Monthly became whenever he felt like it. I should have said no. God knows I should have said no. But he was my only child, and after his father died, he was all I had left. The thought of losing him too terrified me more than poverty, more than debt, more than the growing ache in my chest that told me something was very wrong with this picture. Then Emma came along. Todd was 28, working sporadically, drinking more regularly. He'd met Sarah at some bar in Manhattan, a sweet girl with dreams of being an actress who waitressed at night to pay for headshots and acting classes. They weren't married, barely knew each other, but Sarah got pregnant, and suddenly there was going to be a baby. I remember the day Todd told me. Sarah was 3 months along, and they needed help with prenatal care, with getting ready for the baby, with everything. Mom, he said, sitting at my kitchen table with that look I knew meant he needed money, I know this is a lot to ask, but we really need your help. I looked at this grown man, my son, asking me to finance his responsibilities, and I felt something inside me stretch to the breaking point. But then I thought about the baby, my grandchild, and how none of this was the baby's fault. So I helped. I paid for Sarah's vitamins and doctor visits. I bought the crib, the stroller, the car seat. I painted what used to be my sewing room and turned it into a nursery for when they'd visit. I spent my entire savings account, $6,000 I'd been putting away since I was 40, on things for a baby whose father couldn't be bothered to take responsibility. Emma was born on a Tuesday in February. The most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, with these enormous dark eyes and the softest skin. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt my heart expand in ways I didn't know were possible. This tiny person was half of Todd, but she was also something entirely new. Something pure. I'm going to take such good care of you, I whispered to her that first day. And I meant it. For the first 2 years of Emma's life, I was more than a grandmother, I was a second mother. Todd and Sarah were young and clueless and overwhelmed. Sarah was trying to build her acting career, going to auditions and taking classes. Todd was supposedly looking for steady work but spent most of his time playing video games or hanging out with friends. So guess who ended up watching Emma most days? Guess who got up at 3 in the morning when she was crying? Guess whose apartment became the unofficial daycare center? I didn't mind. I loved that little girl from the moment I met her, and taking care of her filled a hole in my life I'd been carrying since Todd grew up and stopped needing me. Emma's laughter made me remember what joy felt like. Her tiny hand holding mine made me feel valuable again. But as Emma grew older, the dynamic in our family became clearer and uglier. Todd expected me to babysit whenever he wanted to go out. Not asked, expected. He'd show up at my door with Emma and her diaper bag and say, "Mom, I need you to watch her for a few hours," like it was my job, my duty, my obligation. If I ever suggested I had other plans, his face would change. Cold. Disappointed. Like I'd betrayed him somehow. "I thought you loved Emma," he'd say, which was emotional manipulation at its finest. Of course I loved Emma. That love was being used as a weapon against me. And the money. God, the money never stopped. "Mom, Emma needs new clothes." "Mom, our car broke down." "Mom, we're short on rent this month." "Mom, Emma needs school supplies." "Mom, Sarah has an audition but needs money for a headshot." Always mom. Always need. Always now. I was living on Social Security and a small pension from my 30 years working at the diner. $1,200 a month, total. My rent alone was $800. That left me $400 for food, utilities, medication, and supposedly, life. But Todd's requests ate into that $400 every single month. Sometimes he needed $60, sometimes $200. He never asked if I could afford it. He never asked if I needed the money for something else. He just asked, assumed I'd say yes, and took whatever I gave him like it was his right. Do you know what it's like to choose between your blood pressure medication and your son's rent? Do you know what it's like to eat pasta and canned sauce for 2 weeks straight because you spent your grocery money on your granddaughter's winter coat? I do. I know exactly what that's like. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Todd would figure things out eventually, get stable work, become responsible. I told myself that helping them was helping Emma, and Emma deserved everything good in the world. Emma deserved it. But what did I deserve? That question started haunting me around Emma's 5th birthday. I'd planned a little party for her at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just cake and ice cream and a few presents I'd scrimp and save to buy. I made her favorite chocolate cake from scratch, the kind with 3 layers and homemade buttercream frosting that takes hours to make. My arthritis was acting up that day, and standing in the kitchen for that long had my back screaming, but it was for Emma. Todd and Sarah showed up 2 hours late. No apology, no explanation. Emma had been waiting by the window for them, asking every 10 minutes when Daddy was coming. I'd run out of distractions and excuses, and by the time they finally arrived, Emma was more confused than excited. But the worst part wasn't their lateness. It was what happened when they left. I spent the next day cleaning up wrapping paper, washing dishes, putting away leftover cake. My apartment felt so quiet after Emma's laughter echoed through it. I was sorting through the photos I'd taken of her opening presents when I found a piece of paper that had fallen out of Todd's jacket pocket. It was a receipt from a bar. Dated the night before Emma's party. $47 for drinks. $47. The same amount Todd had asked me for 3 days earlier, claiming he needed it for Emma's birthday present. I sat there holding that receipt, feeling something inside my chest collapse. He'd lied to me. He'd looked me in the eyes, asked me for money for Emma, and then spent it getting drunk with his friends. That was the first time I really understood what was happening to me. I wasn't being loved, I was being used. But understanding it and doing something about it are 2 different things, aren't they? I kept giving. Kept helping. Kept saying yes when I should have been saying no. Because what was the alternative? What if I said no and Todd got angry? What if he decided I wasn't worth the trouble and stopped bringing Emma around? What if I lost them both? That fear, the fear of being completely alone, kept me trapped in patterns that were slowly killing me. The years blurred together after that. Emma grew from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8. Each year, she became more aware of the dynamics around her, more sensitive to the tension between the adults in her life. Each year, I watched her try harder to please everyone, to be the good girl who wouldn't cause problems. She was learning to make herself smaller too. Just like I'd learned. The pattern was repeating itself. Todd's drinking got worse. What started as weekend socializing became regular evening drinking, became day drinking, became a constant presence in his life. Sarah left when Emma was 7, just packed her things one day and moved to Los Angeles to pursue her dreams. She sends a birthday card twice a year and calls Emma for 10 minutes at Christmas. That's it. So now it was just Todd and Emma, and increasingly, me raising both of them. Todd couldn't hold down jobs anymore. His drinking made him unreliable, argumentative, late. He'd get hired somewhere, work for a few weeks or months, then get fired for attendance or attitude issues. Each time, he'd come to me with a story about unfair bosses or workplace politics, never acknowledging that he was the common denominator in all these situations. "Mom, I just need help until I find something better," became his constant refrain. Help with rent, help with groceries, help with utilities. Never temporary help, permanent support. I was 71 years old and financing a 40-year-old man's life. Emma started staying at my apartment more often. Todd would drop her off Friday evening and pick her up Sunday night, sometimes Monday morning. "I need to look for work," he'd say, but I knew he was spending those weekends bar hopping with whatever friends still tolerated his behavior. Not that I minded having Emma. She was the bright spot in my increasingly dark world. But I started noticing things that worried me. She was too quiet. Too careful. Too eager to please. She'd clean up her toys without being asked, would eat whatever I put in front of her without complaint, would spend hours coloring quietly at my kitchen table while I did household chores. 8-year-olds shouldn't be that well behaved. 8-year-olds should be noisy and messy and demanding. They should take up space and make their needs known. But Emma had learned to be invisible, just like I had. One Saturday morning, she was sitting at that kitchen table, coloring a picture of our family. She'd drawn herself very small, standing between a tall figure she'd labeled Daddy and another figure labeled Grandma. In the picture, Daddy was smiling, Grandma was smiling, but little Emma wasn't smiling at all. "That's a beautiful picture," I told her, but something about it made my stomach hurt. "Daddy says I shouldn't bother people," she said without looking up from her crayons. "He says I should be good and quiet so people won't get tired of me." My heart broke right there at my own kitchen table. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down next to her chair. "You could never bother me. You're not too much trouble. You're perfect exactly as you are." She looked at me with those enormous dark eyes, so serious for such a little person. "Promise? Promise." But even as I said it, I knew I was failing her. I was letting her grow up in the same emotional environment that had nearly destroyed me. I was teaching her, through my own behavior, that love meant giving until you disappeared, that being valuable meant being useful, that asking for anything was selfish. What kind of grandmother was I? My health started declining around Emma's 7th birthday. The stress of supporting Todd financially while emotionally supporting Emma was taking its toll. My blood pressure was constantly elevated. I developed an ulcer. My arthritis got worse. I started having chest pains that scared me enough to go to the emergency room twice. Both times, they said it wasn't a heart attack, just anxiety and stress. They gave me a prescription for anxiety medication that cost $40 I didn't have, so I never filled it. Instead, I drank chamomile tea and told myself things would get better. They didn't get better. They got worse. Todd's drinking escalated to the point where I started worrying about Emma's safety when she was with him. Not that he was violent, he wasn't. But he was neglectful, unreliable, emotionally absent. He'd pass out on the couch while she was supposed to be in his care. He'd forget to feed her dinner or help her with homework. More and more often, Emma would call me from Todd's apartment, whispering into the phone, "Grandma, Daddy's sleeping and I'm scared. Can you come get me?" And I always did. No matter what time it was, no matter how tired I was, no matter that I was enabling Todd's irresponsibility, I'd get dressed, walk the 12 blocks to his apartment, and bring Emma home with me. Because what else could I do? Leave her there? Let her be scared? But each time I rescued the situation, I was making it possible for Todd to avoid consequences. Each time I stepped in, he learned that he didn't have to be responsible because Mom would handle it. I was helping him destroy himself, and I was destroying myself in the process. The breaking point started building in the spring of last year. My neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, started noticing things I thought I was hiding well. Mrs. Garcia is 75, originally from Puerto Rico, and she's lived in the apartment next to mine for 8 years. She's one of those women who notices everything and speaks her mind about it. "Mija," she said to me one afternoon as we checked our mail in the lobby, "you look tired. More than tired. You look worried sick." I tried to brush it off, told her I was fine, just getting older. "But Mrs. Garcia has a way of looking at you that makes it hard to lie." "Does this have to do with that son of yours?" she asked gently. "The one who comes here asking for money?" I was shocked that she'd noticed, but of course she had. Our walls are thin, and Todd wasn't always quiet when he left my apartment frustrated about money I couldn't give him. "He's going through a hard time," I said automatically. "Since Sarah left, it's been difficult for him to manage everything alone." Mrs. Garcia studied my face for a long moment. "And what about you? Who's helping you manage everything?" That question hit me like a physical blow. Because the answer was nobody. Nobody was helping me manage anything. I was everyone's solution, but nobody was mine. "I don't need help," I told her, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Everyone needs help, Mija. Everyone." That conversation planted a seed in my mind that grew over the following weeks. I started paying attention to patterns I'd been ignoring. Like how Todd never asked how I was feeling. Never inquired about my health, my finances, my life outside of what I could do for him. Like how he'd gotten comfortable making demands rather than requests. "I need you to watch Emma this weekend," instead of, "Would you be able to watch Emma if you're not busy?" Like how he'd started treating my apartment as his personal ATM and emergency childcare service, available 24 hours a day. Like how Emma had stopped being excited about going back to her father's place and started asking if she could just live with me. The seed Mrs. Garcia planted grew into awareness, and awareness grew into questions I'd been afraid to ask myself. When had I become so afraid of my own son's disapproval? When had I started believing that my only value was in what I could give other people? When had I forgotten that I was a person with needs and feelings and rights? And most importantly, what was I teaching Emma about how women should expect to be treated? That last question haunted me. Emma was watching everything, learning from everything. She was learning that women give and men take. She was learning that love means sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. She was learning that asking for respect or consideration makes you selfish. I didn't want that for her. God knows I didn't want her to end up like me. But changing patterns that have been in place for decades isn't easy, especially when you're afraid of the consequences. The first consequence I was afraid of was loneliness. If I stopped being useful to Todd, would he still want me in his life? Would I still get to see Emma? The second consequence was guilt. How could I say no to helping my own son? What kind of mother puts her own needs ahead of her child's? The third consequence was financial. Todd owed me thousands of dollars by this point, money I'd lent him over the years that I knew I'd never see again. If I cut him off, that money was definitely gone forever. But there was a fourth consequence I hadn't considered, and it was the most terrifying of all. What if I said no and discovered that I could survive it? What if I set boundaries and learned that I was stronger than I thought? What if I discovered that I'd been choosing to be a victim? That thought terrified me more than loneliness, guilt, or poverty combined. Because if I'd been choosing this life, then I'd wasted decades being miserable when I could have been something else. Summer came, and with it, a heat wave that made my unair-conditioned apartment feel like an oven. I was spending money I didn't have on fans and extra electricity, trying to make the place comfortable for Emma's visits. Todd had been laid off from his latest job, something about budget cuts, he said, but I suspected the real reason was his increasingly erratic behavior. He was drinking more openly now, not even trying to hide it when he picked Emma up or dropped her off. One evening in July, he showed up at my door at nearly 10 o'clock, obviously intoxicated. Emma wasn't with him, thankfully. "Mom," he slurred, leaning against my doorframe, "I need to talk to you." I let him in, made coffee, tried to create some space between him and whatever crisis had brought him to my apartment at this hour. "I need money," he said, getting straight to the point. "A lot of money. Like, $1,500. I nearly choked on my coffee. $1,500? I didn't have $1,500. I never had $1,500 just lying around. "Todd, that's more money than I have," I told him honestly. "What do you need $1,500 for?" His story was convoluted and probably largely fictional. Something about a security deposit for a better apartment, a job opportunity that required upfront investment, a debt to someone who was threatening legal action. The details kept changing as he talked. But what became clear was that he expected me to find this money somehow. He expected me to cash in my small retirement account, to borrow from friends, to take out a loan, whatever it took to solve his problem. "Mom, if you don't help me, I don't know what I'm going to do," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not sadness or desperation, but anger. Like I owed him this money. Like my refusal to bankrupt myself for his choices was a betrayal. "I can't give you $1,500, I said quietly. "I don't have it." "You could get it if you wanted to," he replied coldly. "You could borrow it, or use your retirement account, or sell something. You just don't want to help me." That accusation hit me like a slap. After everything I'd given him over the years, money, time, energy, pieces of my own life, he was accusing me of not wanting to help. "Todd, I've been helping you for years," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I've given you thousands of dollars, watched Emma countless times, supported you through job losses and breakups and every crisis you've had. I help you constantly." "That's what mothers are supposed to do," he said, as if my decades of sacrifice were nothing more than the minimum requirement. Something inside me snapped that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet click that I felt in my bones. "I think you should go," I said, standing up from the kitchen table. "You're drunk, and this conversation isn't going anywhere good." He left, but not before slamming my door hard enough to rattle the dishes in my cabinet. I sat in my quiet apartment afterward, thinking about what he'd said. That's what mothers are supposed to do. Was it? Was I supposed to impoverish myself to fund his irresponsibility? Was I supposed to sacrifice my health, my peace of mind, my future security because I'd given birth to him 4 decades ago? And if that's what mothers were supposed to do, what were sons supposed to do in return? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Emma, about the woman she was growing up to become. If she watched me give everything and ask for nothing, what would she think she deserved from life? If she watched Todd take everything and offer nothing, what would she think she should accept from the men in her life? I was raising a granddaughter to be a victim, just like I'd raised a son to be a user. The realization made me sick. But realizing something and changing it are different things entirely. I knew what was happening, but I didn't know how to stop it. The patterns were so deeply ingrained, the fear of confrontation so overwhelming, that even with awareness, I felt paralyzed. Then came that Saturday in August. The day that changed everything. I'd gone to the grocery store on Northern Boulevard that afternoon, planning to make dinner for Emma's visit the next day. She loved my chicken and rice, and I wanted to have her favorite foods ready. The grocery store was crowded, hot, and expensive. Everything cost more than it used to, and my fixed income bought less each month. I stood in the produce section for 20 minutes, comparing apple prices and calculating whether I could afford the good ones for Emma's pie. I decided to splurge. Organic Gala apples, for $1 a pound, enough for a proper pie. It would mean eating pasta for the rest of the week, but Emma's smile was worth it. The walk home was longer than usual. The heat was oppressive, and the grocery bag felt heavier with each block. By the time I climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, I was exhausted and looking forward to sitting down with a glass of water and maybe calling Emma to let her know about the pie. I put my key in the lock and turned it quietly, as always. I'd gotten into the habit of being quiet in my own home, trying not to disturb anyone or announce my presence. But what I heard when I opened that door will haunt me forever. Emma's soft crying came from the direction of the balcony. Not loud sobbing, but the quiet, hopeless kind of crying that children do when they've learned that nobody's going to come comfort them. And from my living room, Todd's voice, loud and slurred and cruel, "You should see my mom. She'll do anything for us. Anything. It's almost too easy. I just tell her Emma needs something, and she hands over whatever money she has. It's pathetic, really." His friends laughed. Actually laughed at my love for my granddaughter. "Doesn't she ever say no?" one of them asked. "Never," Todd replied, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "She's desperate to feel needed. It's embarrassing how grateful she gets when we come around." I stood frozen in my own doorway, grocery bag cutting into my wrist, listening to my son mock me to strangers. But worse than the mockery was the accuracy of it. Everything he said was true. I was pathetic. I was desperate. I was embarrassingly grateful for scraps of attention from people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I set the groceries down as quietly as possible and walked toward the balcony where Emma was crying. She was curled up in the corner, trying to make herself invisible, tears streaming down her face while her father entertained his friends 20 feet away. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, and they looked like they hadn't been washed in days. "Emma," I whispered, and she looked up at me with those enormous eyes full of relief and shame. "Grandma, I didn't know if you were home," she whispered back. "Daddy said not to bother you, but I heard loud voices and I got scared." I knelt down next to her, my niece screaming in protest, and gathered her into my arms. She was too thin. When had she gotten so thin? "How long have you been out here, baby?" "Since Daddy's friends came over. He said I should go outside and be quiet while they talked about grown-up things." It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. She'd been banished to the balcony for hours while Todd drank with his coworkers in my living room, using my electricity and my food and probably my money to fund their entertainment. In that moment, holding my frightened granddaughter while my son mocked me to strangers in my own home, something fundamental shifted inside me. I wasn't just being exploited anymore. Emma was being neglected, abandoned, emotionally damaged by this dysfunction that I was enabling. My fear of confrontation, my desperate need to be needed, my willingness to accept any treatment as long as it meant I wasn't alone, all of that was hurting the person I loved most in the world. Emma deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, so did I. "Come on, sweetheart," I said, helping her to her feet. "Let's go inside and get you something to eat." "But Daddy said," "Daddy was wrong," I said firmly. "This is my house, and you are always welcome here. You never have to hide on the balcony in your grandmother's home." We walked through the living room where Todd and his 3 friends had made themselves comfortable on my furniture, drinking beer they hadn't paid for, eating sandwiches made from groceries I'd bought. Todd looked up when he saw us, and for just a moment, I saw something like shame flicker across his face. But it was quickly replaced by irritation. "Mom, I told Emma to stay outside while we were having an adult conversation. And I'm telling you that's unacceptable," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Emma is 8 years old. She doesn't get banished from her grandmother's home so you can drink with your friends." His friends looked uncomfortable, probably sensing the tension. "Good. They should feel uncomfortable. We'll just go," one of them started to say, but Todd cut him off. "No, we're fine here. Mom, Emma can stay in your bedroom if she wants to be inside." The audacity of it took my breath away. He was giving me permission to have my granddaughter in my own apartment while telling his friends they were welcome to stay and continue their party. "Actually," I said, still in that steady voice I barely recognized, "I think it's time for everyone to go. Emma needs dinner and a bath, and it's late." "Mom, we're in the middle of something here." "I can see that. You're in the middle of neglecting your daughter while drinking in my living room. And that's ending now." The room went quiet. Even Emma stopped crying. Todd's face changed, becoming harder, more hostile. This was a side of him I'd seen glimpses of over the years but never directed fully at me. "Don't embarrass me in front of my friends," he said quietly, but there was a threat in his voice. "You embarrassed yourself," I replied. "I'm just asking you to leave." His friends were already getting up, mumbling excuses and goodbye. They'd gotten the message loud and clear, the party was over. But Todd wasn't done. "You know what, Mom? I've been trying to be nice, trying to include you in our lives, but maybe it's time we had some space." "Include me?" I was funding their lives. I was raising his daughter half the time. I was sacrificing my own well-being to support his poor choices. And he was framing it as him doing me a favor? "Maybe that would be best," I said, and I meant it. After they left, Todd storming out with dramatic declarations about how ungrateful I was, I sat in my quiet living room with Emma curled up next to me, eating a peanut butter sandwich and watching cartoons. "Are you mad at Daddy?" she asked in her small voice. "I'm disappointed," I told her honestly. But I'm not mad at you. You didn't do anything wrong. He says you get mad when we need things. My heart broke a little more. Emma, I never get mad when you need things. Never. You're a child, and children have needs. That's normal and okay. She nodded, but I could see she didn't quite believe me. Todd had been telling her stories about me, painting me as the unreasonable one when I couldn't give them everything they wanted. That night, after Emma was asleep in my bed, I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at my life for the first time in years. I was 72 years old. I was living on $1,200 a month and giving away at least $300 of that to support a grown man who mocked me behind my back. I was raising his daughter because he was too drunk and irresponsible to do it himself. I was sacrificing my health, my financial security, and my peace of mind, and getting nothing in return except criticism and exploitation. When had I become this person? When had I decided that my only value was in what I could give other people? I thought about my own mother, dead now for 15 years. She'd been strong, independent, opinionated. She'd raised 3 children during the Depression, worked 2 jobs, survived my father's early death, and built a life for herself. She never would have tolerated what I was accepting. You're too soft, she used to tell me when I was young. The world will eat you alive if you don't learn to stand up for yourself. She'd been right. The world had eaten me alive. But maybe it wasn't too late to find the bones they'd left behind and rebuild something stronger. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out a shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photos, letters, mementos from happier times. Pictures of Todd as a little boy, proud and smiling. Pictures of Emma as a baby, so tiny and perfect. Pictures of my husband and me when we were young and hopeful. Looking at those photos, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person who'd been happy in those pictures. Somewhere along the way, trying to make everyone else happy, I'd lost myself completely. But people can be found again. Sometimes they can even be rebuilt, stronger than before. That was the night I decided to stop letting my family use me up until there was nothing left. The next morning, Emma woke up chattering about the cartoons she'd watched the night before, more animated than I'd seen her in months. We made pancakes together, and she helped me mix the batter, getting flour all over the kitchen and herself. "This is fun, Grandma," she said, licking chocolate chips off her fingers. "Yes, it is," I agreed, and realized I couldn't remember the last time Todd and I had done anything that was simply fun. Everything was crisis management, damage control, emergency assistance. Around noon, Todd called. His voice was different, less aggressive than the night before, but still defensive. "Mom, I think we need to talk." "I think so too. Look, I'm sorry if I was out of line last night. I'd been drinking, and, Todd," I interrupted, "this isn't about last night. This is about years of nights like last night. This is about patterns that need to change." Silence on the other end of the line. "I can't keep doing this," I continued. "I can't keep giving you money I don't have while Emma gets neglected. I can't keep enabling your drinking by taking care of all your responsibilities. And I can't keep accepting disrespect in my own home." "Mom, you're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting. I'm finally reacting appropriately." More silence. "What does that mean?" he asked finally. "It means things are going to be different from now on. It means I'm going to start saying no when I need to say no. It means Emma's well-being comes first, always. And it means you're going to have to start taking responsibility for your own life. And if I don't?" The question hung in the air between us. It was the threat I'd been afraid of for years. What if I set boundaries and he walked away? What if I chose self-respect over his approval and lost him entirely? But sitting in my kitchen with Emma coloring at the table beside me, I realized I'd already lost the Todd who mattered to me. The little boy who'd hugged me over a homemade pirate costume was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as nothing more than a source of money and free childcare. I couldn't lose something I'd already lost. "Then you'll have to live with your choices," I said quietly. "Just like I've been living with mine." He hung up without saying goodbye. Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Was that Daddy?" "Yes." "Is he mad?" I considered lying, giving her some comforting story about how everything was fine. But I was tired of lies, even protective ones. "He's upset because I told him some things need to change. But sometimes people get upset when they hear the truth. That doesn't mean the truth shouldn't be told." She nodded solemnly, like she understood more than an 8-year-old should have to understand. That afternoon, I called Mrs. Garcia and asked if she'd like to have coffee. We sat in her apartment, brighter and more cheerfully decorated than mine, and I told her everything. The money, the manipulation, the mockery, the neglect of Emma. "Mija," she said, shaking her head. "How long has this been going on?" "Years. Maybe Emma's whole life. And you're just now getting angry about it?" "I'm not really angry," I realized as I said it. "I'm sad. I'm disappointed. But mostly, I'm tired. I'm tired of being taken advantage of, and I'm terrified that Emma is learning to accept this as normal. Mrs. Garcia studied my face for a long moment. You know what you have to do. I think I do. But I'm scared. Of course you're scared. Change is scary. But what's scarier, being alone or being with people who treat you like garbage? It was a good question. What was scarier? I keep thinking, what if Todd takes Emma away? What if I never see her again? Mija, from what you've told me, Todd can barely take care of himself, much less a little girl. You think he's going to suddenly become Father of the Year just to spite you? She was right. Todd's threats were empty because his follow-through was non-existent. He relied on my fear more than his own power. You know what I think? Mrs. Garcia continued. I think that little girl needs to see her grandmother stand up for herself. I think she needs to learn that women don't have to accept whatever treatment they get. I think you could teach her the most important lesson of her life. That evening, after Emma went to bed, I sat down with a notebook and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a boundaries list. What I would no longer accept, what I would start requiring, what I needed to feel respected and valued. The list was longer than I expected. I will not give money to Todd without a written agreement about repayment. I will not babysit Emma without reasonable notice unless it's a genuine emergency. I will not accept disrespect in my own home from anyone. I will not let Emma be neglected when she's supposed to be in Todd's care. I will not sacrifice my own basic needs to fund other people's wants. I will not feel guilty for having boundaries. Looking at that list, I realized how far I'd strayed from treating myself with basic human dignity. These weren't unreasonable demands, they were the minimum requirements for a healthy relationship. But implementing them would require strength I wasn't sure I had. Over the next few days, I started small. When Todd called asking for grocery money, I said no. When he complained that Emma was being difficult, I offered to take her for the weekend instead of giving him advice on managing his own daughter. Each small boundary felt monumental. Each no felt like I was risking everything. But nothing catastrophic happened. The world didn't end. Todd didn't disappear. Emma didn't stop loving me. In fact, something strange occurred. I started feeling better. Less anxious. Less resentful. More like a person instead of a resource. Emma noticed. You seem different, Grandma, she said one afternoon while we were baking cookies. Different how? Happier, I guess. Less worried all the time. From the mouths of babes. 2 weeks after my confrontation with Todd, he showed up at my apartment looking haggard and desperate. He'd been fired from another job, he said. The unemployment office was taking forever to process his claim. He needed help with rent, with groceries, with everything. Mom, I know we had some disagreements, but I really need you right now. The old me would have immediately opened my purse, given him whatever cash I had, called friends to borrow more. The old me would have felt guilty about those disagreements and tried to make up for them by being extra generous. But the new me had been thinking about Emma's future. Todd, I'll help you apply for assistance programs. I'll watch Emma whenever you have job interviews. I'll make sure she has everything she needs. But I'm done financing your life. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, disbelief, then a calculated sadness designed to manipulate my emotions. I can't believe you'd abandon me when I need you most. I'm not abandoning you. I'm parenting you. For the first time in probably 20 years, I'm parenting you instead of enabling you. What's the difference? Parents help their children become independent, capable adults. Enablers do everything for their children so they never have to grow up. He left angry, but he left. And for the first time in years, I felt like I'd done something right. That weekend, Emma stayed with me as usual, but the dynamic was different. Instead of tiptoeing around, trying not to be a bother, she was more relaxed, more herself. We went to the park, visited the library, walked around the neighborhood. Normal grandmother-granddaughter activities that had somehow become rare in our crisis-focused relationship. Grandma, she said as we sat on a bench feeding pigeons, are you and Daddy fighting? We're having a disagreement about some important things. Is it my fault? My heart clenched. Oh, sweetheart, no. This has nothing to do with you. This is about grown-up stuff, about how people should treat each other. Daddy says you don't want to help us anymore. I turned to face her fully. Emma, I will always help you. Always. But I need to make sure that my help is actually helping, not making things worse. She didn't fully understand, but she nodded like she trusted me to figure it out. That night, I tucked her into my bed and sat beside her in the dark. Grandma? Yes, baby? I love you. I love you too. So much. Will you always be my grandma? Even if Daddy gets mad, I will always be your grandma. Nothing can change that. Nothing. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. If I kept setting boundaries, would Todd eventually cut me out of Emma's life completely? Did I have any legal rights as a grandmother? These questions led me to something I probably should have done years earlier. I made an appointment with a lawyer. The legal aid office was in downtown Queens, a bus ride and subway trip that took over an hour each way. The lawyer was a young woman named Jennifer who listened to my story with professional sympathy. Grandparents' rights vary by state, she explained, but in New York, you may have options, especially if you can demonstrate that you've been a primary caregiver and that separating you from Emma would be harmful to her well-being. She encouraged me to document everything: dates Emma stayed with me, money I'd spent on her care, instances of Todd's neglect or inappropriate behavior. I hope it doesn't come to that, she said, but it's good to know your options. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt powerful. Not powerful over other people, but powerful over my own life. I had options. I had rights. I had people who would help me if needed. For the first time in decades, I wasn't completely at the mercy of Todd's whims. The autumn brought changes I couldn't have imagined. Todd's calls became less frequent, his requests more desperate. Without my financial safety net, he was having to face the consequences of his choices more directly. Emma started school, and I began volunteering in her classroom once a week. Seeing her with other children, I realized how much more mature and serious she was compared to her peers. She was still carrying emotional weight that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to carry. But she was also starting to smile more, laugh more freely. The less chaos there was in our family system, the more she seemed able to just be a kid. One afternoon in October, Todd called with a different kind of request. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. About enabling and parenting and all that. I think maybe I need help. Real help." It was the first time in years he'd acknowledged having a problem instead of just having bad luck. "What kind of help are you thinking about?" "I don't know. Maybe AA or something. I keep losing jobs, and I know it's because of the drinking. And Emma, she deserves better than what I've been giving her." It was more self-awareness than I'd heard from him in a decade. "I think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "And I'll support you in any way that actually helps your recovery." Would you watch Emma while I go to meetings? If I actually start going?" "Yes. Absolutely." It wasn't a complete transformation, those don't happen overnight, especially with addiction. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were moving in a healthy direction instead of just repeating the same destructive patterns. Emma was ecstatic when I told her that Daddy was going to get help feeling better. "Does that mean he won't be sad all the time anymore?" Her question broke my heart. She'd been so tuned into Todd's emotional state, trying to manage his feelings along with her own. "I hope so, sweetheart. But even if Daddy is sad sometimes, that's not your job to fix." "Whose job is it?" "Daddy's job. With help from other grown-ups." The concept seemed revolutionary to her, that she wasn't responsible for managing the adults in her life. Todd did start attending AA meetings, though sporadically at first. I watched Emma during those times, and gradually, I started noticing changes in both of them. Emma began acting more like an 8-year-old. She asked for things she wanted instead of just accepting whatever was offered. She had opinions about meals, about activities, about clothes. She started taking up space in the world instead of trying to disappear. And Todd, slowly and imperfectly, started taking more responsibility for his life. He found a part-time job and kept it for 3 months, longer than he'd kept any job in years. He started paying me back in small installments, $20 or $30 at a time, money I'd given up hope of ever seeing. But the biggest change was that he started seeing Emma as his responsibility instead of mine. "I can't bring her over this weekend," he told me one Friday. "I have to work Saturday, and it's not fair to dump her on you just because my schedule is inconvenient." This was a complete reversal of his previous attitude, where my availability was assumed and his convenience prioritized. "I don't mind watching her," I said, because I didn't. "I know you don't mind. But that's not the point. I'm her father. I need to figure out childcare, not just hand her off to you whenever it's easier for me." It was such a small thing, but it represented a massive shift in how he saw our relationship. I wasn't his backup parent anymore. I was Emma's grandmother, which was a different role entirely. The holidays that year were different than they'd been in a long time. Instead of me cooking and buying presents and hosting while Todd and Emma showed up to be entertained, we shared responsibilities. Todd bought groceries for Thanksgiving dinner. Emma helped me cook. We made decisions together about what traditions to keep and what new ones to start. On Christmas morning, Emma gave me a card she'd made at school. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching Daddy how to be a better daddy." I cried reading that card, but they were good tears. Tears of relief, of hope, of something that might have been pride. The winter passed quietly. Not the tense quiet of walking on eggshells, but the peaceful quiet of a functional family finding its rhythm. Todd's recovery had setbacks. Addiction doesn't disappear overnight, but the overall trajectory was positive. More importantly, Emma was thriving. Her teacher commented on how much more confident and outgoing she'd become. She made friends at school. She started taking art classes at the community center. And I was changing too. I'd started taking a pottery class at the senior center, something I'd wanted to do for years but never felt I had time for. I'd reconnected with an old friend, Maria, who'd been trying to get together with me for months before I finally started saying yes to social invitations. I painted my apartment walls a soft blue-gray instead of the dingy beige they'd been for 15 years. I bought new curtains. I put up pictures of Emma and me together, instead of just pictures of other people. I was creating a life instead of just surviving one. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected conversation. "Mom," Todd said during one of our regular Sunday dinners, "I owe you an apology. A real one, not just for the drinking or the money or any specific thing. I owe you an apology for taking advantage of your love." I looked up from my plate, surprised by his directness. "For years, I treated you like you existed to solve my problems. I never asked how you were doing, never considered what you might need, never thought about the cost to you of constantly bailing me out. I was selfish and entitled, and I'm sorry." It was the apology I'd been waiting for without even realizing I'd been waiting for it. "Thank you," I said simply. "I don't know if I can ever really make up for it." "You don't have to make up for it. You just have to do better going forward." "I'm trying." "I can see that." Emma, who'd been listening to this adult conversation with the seriousness that had become characteristic of her, spoke up. "Does this mean our family is fixed now?" Todd and I looked at each other and laughed, the first spontaneous laughter we'd shared in years. "Families aren't like broken toys, sweetheart," I told her. "You can't just fix them and have them be perfect. But you can keep working on them, keep making them better." "Are we making ours better?" "I think so. What do you think?" She considered this seriously. "I think we're getting better at loving each other the right way." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Summer brought a milestone I'd never expected, Emma's first sleepover party. She wanted to invite 3 friends from school to celebrate her 9th birthday, and she wanted to have it at my apartment. The old me would have panicked about the mess, the noise, the expense. The new me was delighted that Emma felt comfortable enough in my space to want to share it with her friends. We planned the party together, pizza, cake, movies, and enough giggling to keep the neighbors awake. Todd helped set up decorations and even stayed to help supervise, something the old Todd never would have done. Watching Emma laugh with her friends in my living room, I realized how different our family looked now compared to a year ago. We looked like people who actually enjoyed each other's company instead of people trapped in dysfunctional obligations. That night, after the friends went home and Todd took Emma back to his place, I sat in my quiet apartment looking at the remnants of the party. Paper plates with pizza crusts, empty soda cans, streamers hanging from the ceiling. It should have felt like a mess to clean up. Instead, it felt like evidence of joy. Mrs. Garcia knocked on my door around 10 o'clock. "How was the party, Mija?" "Perfect," I told her, and meant it. "You look different than you did a year ago." "I feel different." "Good different?" "Much better different." She smiled. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right? What you did, standing up for yourself, changing those patterns, that took real courage." "I almost didn't do it. I was so scared of being alone." "But you weren't alone, were you? You had me, you had Emma, you had all the people who actually cared about you instead of just using you." She was right. I'd been so focused on the relationship I might lose that I hadn't noticed all the relationships I already had. As autumn approached again, marking a full year since my transformation began, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly my life had changed. I wasn't wealthy, I was still living on the same modest income. But I wasn't poor anymore either, because I wasn't supporting Todd's lifestyle. I wasn't lonely, I had Emma's genuine affection, Mrs. Garcia's friendship, my pottery group, Maria, and increasingly, a healthier relationship with Todd based on mutual respect instead of exploitation. I wasn't afraid anymore, afraid of saying no, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being seen as selfish or difficult. Most importantly, I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the woman who solved other people's problems. I was a person with my own interests, opinions, needs, and rights. The woman who used to stand in her doorway listening to her son mock her while her granddaughter cried alone on the balcony felt like a stranger to me now. Not because I'd forgotten her, but because I'd rescued her. One evening in late October, exactly 13 months after that devastating night when everything changed, Emma and I were walking through our neighborhood after her art class. "Grandma," she said, swinging our joined hands, "do you remember when I used to cry a lot?" "I remember. I don't cry as much anymore." "No, you don't. Why do you think that is?" She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. "I think it's because nobody's mad all the time anymore. And because I learned that I don't have to fix everybody's feelings." "That's a very wise observation. Daddy says you taught him that too." "What did Daddy learn?" "That being a grown-up means taking care of yourself instead of making other people take care of you." I stopped walking and knelt down to her level. Emma, do you know how proud I am of you? Why? Because you're growing up to be strong and kind and smart. Because you've been through some hard things and you're still sweet and loving. Because you're learning to take up space in the world instead of trying to disappear. She hugged me tight. I learned that from watching you. That night, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the fear, the gradual awakening to my own worth. The courage to set boundaries, the strength to maintain them, the patience to let healing happen slowly. I thought about other women my age who might be living the life I used to live, invisible, exploited, afraid to demand better treatment because they feared losing what little connection they had. I thought about Emma and the lessons she was learning about how women should expect to be treated, how love should look, what healthy relationships require. I thought about Todd and his slow, imperfect journey toward becoming the man and father Emma deserved. But mostly, I thought about me. About the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. About the choice I'd made to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. About the discovery that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The old me would have called it selfish. The new me knew it was essential, not just for me, but for everyone who loved me. You can't give from an empty well. You can't teach others to respect you if you don't respect yourself. You can't model healthy relationships while accepting unhealthy treatment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling the people you love to treat you badly. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is teach others to be responsible for their own lives. Sometimes the most nurturing thing you can do is show the children in your life that adults don't have to accept whatever treatment they receive. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had gray hair and wrinkled skin, arthritis and age spots. But she also had clear eyes, straight shoulders, and something that had been missing for too many years, dignity. I'd spent decades believing that my only value was in what I could give other people. I'd measured my worth by my usefulness, my success by other people's happiness, my love by my willingness to sacrifice. But somewhere in the process of refusing to be used, I discovered that I was valuable just as I was. Not because of what I could do for others, but because I was a human being deserving of respect and care. It had taken me 72 years to learn that lesson, but I'd learned it. More importantly, I was teaching it to Emma. She would grow up knowing that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that boundaries are healthy, that women have the right to expect decent treatment. That knowledge might save her from spending decades of her own life being invisible. 6 months later, spring returned to New York City, and with it came an invitation that surprised me. Todd called on a Saturday morning, his voice nervous but determined. Mom, I've been in my program for over a year now, and they have these family meetings where people can share their experiences. I was wondering, would you consider coming to one? I'd like to tell my story, including the part about how my behavior affected you. A year earlier, the request would have terrified me. Standing in front of strangers, talking about personal family issues, exposing our problems to outsiders, everything in me would have rebelled against such public vulnerability. But this version of me was curious rather than afraid. What would you want to say? I asked. The truth. About how I exploited your love and generosity. About how my drinking and irresponsibility hurt Emma. About how you standing up to me probably saved my life. You think it saved your life? Mom, I was destroying everything good in my life. My relationship with Emma, my relationship with you, my health, my ability to work. If you hadn't forced me to face consequences, I would have kept spiraling until there was nothing left. And you want to share that with other people? I want to share it because maybe it will help someone else. Maybe there's another family out there stuck in the same patterns we were stuck in. Maybe hearing our story could help them change sooner than we did. The idea of helping other families avoid the years of pain we'd endured appealed to me immensely. Yes, I said. I'll come. The meeting was held in a community center in Brooklyn, in a room filled with folding chairs and fluorescent lights and the kind of institutional coffee that tastes like it was made in 1987. There were maybe 30 people there, some Todd's age, some younger, some older, plus family members and friends. When Todd's turn came to speak, he introduced me and Emma, then told our story with an honesty that left me in tears. He talked about using emotional manipulation to get money from me. He talked about neglecting Emma while I picked up the slack. He talked about mocking my generosity to his friends. But he also talked about my courage in setting boundaries, about how my refusal to enable him had forced him to face his problems, about how our family had healed once healthy patterns replaced destructive ones. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then a woman about my age raised her hand. I have a question for Todd's mother, she said. How did you find the strength to say no? I'm in a similar situation with my son, and I'm so afraid that if I stop helping him, he'll disappear from my life. I looked at this woman, probably in her late 60s, wearing the same expression of exhaustion and worry I'd carried for years, and saw myself before my transformation. I had to ask myself what I was really afraid of, I said. I thought I was afraid of losing my son. But what I was really afraid of was admitting that the relationship I was trying so hard to preserve wasn't actually a relationship. It was an arrangement where I provided resources and he provided minimal contact in return. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Once I accepted that I'd already lost the son I wanted to have, I could start building a relationship with the son who actually existed. But that couldn't happen while I was enabling him to avoid growing up. After the meeting, several people came up to talk with me. 2 other grandmothers in similar situations. A father who'd been enabling his adult daughter's drug addiction. An elderly man whose grown children had been exploiting his generosity for years. All of them carried the same expression of exhausted love, the same fear of being alone, the same confusion about where help ended and harm began. For 2 hours after the official meeting ended, we sat in that fluorescent-lit room and shared stories, strategies, encouragement. I found myself in the unexpected role of mentor, helping other people navigate the same transformation I'd undergone. Driving home that night, Emma asleep in the back seat and Todd sober behind the wheel, I marveled at how completely our family had reinvented itself. We weren't perfect. We never would be. Todd's recovery was ongoing, requiring daily attention. Emma still carried some emotional scars from her early years. I was still learning to balance healthy support with enabling. But we were real now in a way we'd never been before. Our love was based on genuine care rather than obligation and exploitation. Our relationships were relationships instead of transactions. That summer, I did something I'd been wanting to do for 20 years. I took a trip. Not a big trip, just a long weekend in Vermont with Maria, driving through small towns and eating at local diners and staying in a bed and breakfast with no television and no phone service. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I didn't arrange extensive childcare coverage or worry about being unavailable for emergencies. I just went. Emma stayed with Todd for the weekend, and neither of them acted like this was an unusual imposition. Todd had stepped fully into his role as Emma's primary parent, and Emma had adjusted to spending most of her time with her father instead of with me. I missed them while I was gone, but I also reveled in the freedom to make spontaneous decisions, to eat when I was hungry, to stop when something looked interesting, to have adult conversations about books and politics and anything other than family crises. On the drive back to New York, Maria and I talked about the changes in my life over the past 2 years. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Standing up to Todd, I mean. Setting all those boundaries? I thought about it seriously. I regret that it took me so long to do it. I regret the years Emma and I both spent walking on eggshells. I regret enabling Todd's problems instead of helping him face them. But do I regret demanding to be treated with respect? Never. You seem like a completely different person. I am a completely different person. Or maybe I'm the person I always was, just buried under years of other people's expectations and my own fear. That evening, back in my apartment, Emma came over to hear about my trip. She looked through my photos, sampled the Vermont maple candy I'd brought her, and curled up next to me on the couch. Grandma, do you think you'll take more trips? I think I might. Would that be okay with you? I think it's good that you do things that make you happy. Daddy says that's how people stay interesting. Smart Daddy. Smart Grandma too. As autumn approached, 2 full years since that terrible night when everything changed, I found myself preparing for Emma's 10th birthday. Double digits, as she kept reminding everyone. But this year's planning was different. Instead of me shouldering all the responsibility and expense, we were working as a team. Todd handled the invitations and party games. Emma chose the menu and decorations. I made the cake and coordinated with parents. The party was held at Todd's apartment, clean, organized, sober, with 15 of Emma's classmates and several parents. Watching Emma laugh with her friends, confident and outgoing and beautifully normal, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with credit or recognition. This was what I'd been working toward without even knowing it, a granddaughter who felt secure enough to be herself, a son who was present and engaged in his own life, a family that functioned without crisis or drama. After the guests left and we'd cleaned up, the 3 of us sat around Todd's kitchen table sharing leftover cake. This was the best birthday ever, Emma announced, chocolate frosting still smeared on her chin. Better than last year? I asked. All of my birthdays keep getting better, she said. Every year, everyone is happier. Todd and I exchanged glances over her head. She was right. Each year did bring more stability, more genuine connection, more real happiness instead of the artificial cheerfulness that had masked our dysfunction. That night, walking home to my apartment, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years earlier. Exhausted, exploited, afraid of her own son's anger, enabling destruction while calling it love. That woman had been so focused on not losing people that she'd never stopped to consider whether those relationships were worth keeping in their current form. That woman had confused being needed with being loved, utility with value, self-sacrifice with virtue. That woman had nearly sacrificed her granddaughter's chance at a healthy childhood in order to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about her family. I felt compassion for that woman. She'd been doing the best she could with limited tools and overwhelming fear. But I was grateful to have evolved beyond her. The woman I was now understood that love without respect isn't love. That helping someone avoid consequences isn't helping them grow. That teaching children to accept poor treatment isn't protecting them, it's setting them up for a lifetime of exploitation. The woman I was now knew that she deserved to be treated well, not because she'd earned it through service, but because she was a human being with inherent worth. The woman I was now understood that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was essential for everyone's well-being. But most importantly, the woman I was now knew that it's never too late to change. Never too late to demand better. Never too late to stop accepting unacceptable treatment and start creating the life you deserve. On a crisp December evening, exactly 2 years and 4 months after that devastating Saturday night, I was preparing dinner when Emma called. "Grandma, can I come over? I have something to show you." "Of course, sweetheart." 20 minutes later, she arrived with a school project, a family tree she'd made for social studies class. At the top of the tree were photos of me and her grandfather, whom she'd never met but had heard stories about. Below that were photos of Todd and Sarah. And at the bottom was Emma's own picture. But what struck me wasn't the photos, it was the way she'd decorated the tree. Instead of just names and dates, she'd written words describing each family member. Next to my photo, she'd written, "My grandmother who taught me to be strong and kind." Next to Todd's, "My father who is learning to be the best daddy he can be." Next to her own, me, Emma, who is loved and important. "Do you like it?" she asked, watching my face carefully. "I love it," I said, and meant it completely. That evening, after Emma went home, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and thought about legacy. What was I passing down to Emma? What lessons was she learning from watching our family transform? She was learning that people can change. That love includes accountability. That women have the right to expect decent treatment. That families can heal if everyone is willing to do their part. But most importantly, she was learning that she was worthy of love just as she was, not because of what she could do for other people, but because of who she was. That knowledge might be the most valuable gift I could give her. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that I'd stopped thinking about my story as a tragedy. The years of exploitation and manipulation weren't a waste, they were the necessary darkness that made me appreciate the light. Without experiencing what unhealthy relationships felt like, I might never have recognized or fought for healthy ones. Without losing myself in other people's needs, I might never have discovered my own worth. Without reaching my breaking point, I might never have found my strength. Every difficult experience had contributed to the woman I'd become, a woman who knew her value, who set appropriate boundaries, who loved generously but wisely. A woman who would never again mistake being used for being loved. A woman who had finally learned the difference between helping and enabling, between supporting and supporting dysfunction, between kindness and doormat behavior. A woman who understood that saying no to unhealthy requests was actually saying yes to healthy relationships. This morning, as I write this story, Emma is 11 years old and thriving. She's confident, creative, appropriately demanding of the attention and care she deserves. She has friends, interests, opinions, dreams for her future. Todd has been sober for over 2 years. He's working full-time, living independently, parenting actively. He's not perfect, recovery is an ongoing process, but he's present in his own life in ways he never was before. And me? I'm 74 years old, living in the same small apartment in Queens, getting by on the same modest income. But everything else about my life has been transformed. I have friends. I have hobbies. I have plans for the future that don't revolve around other people's crises. I have relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. Most importantly, I have myself back. The woman who once stood in her own doorway, invisible and exploited, listening to her son mock her generosity while her granddaughter cried alone, seems like someone I knew in another lifetime. Not because I've forgotten her pain, but because I've transformed it into power. Not because the memories don't hurt, but because they've taught me everything I needed to know about my own strength. If you're listening to this story and recognizing your own life in it, if you're the grandmother financing an adult child's irresponsibility, the parent whose love is being exploited, the spouse whose kindness is being taken for granted, I want you to know that change is possible. It won't be easy. It will require courage you're not sure you have, boundaries you're afraid to set, conversations you've been avoiding for years. You'll risk losing people who are only in your life because of what you provide for them. But what you'll gain is yourself, your dignity, your peace of mind, and relationships with people who actually see and value you as a person. You'll gain the chance to model healthy relationships for the children in your life instead of teaching them to accept whatever treatment they receive. You'll gain the possibility of genuine love instead of transactional arrangements disguised as family bonds. the transformation won't happen overnight. Mine took months of small steps, small boundaries, small acts of courage that gradually built into major life changes. But it will happen, if you decide you deserve better than what you've been accepting. Because you do deserve better. Not because you've earned it through suffering or service, but because you're a human being with inherent worth. Not because you're perfect, but because you're valuable exactly as you are. Not because relationships should be easy, but because they should be mutual. The woman I am now, sitting by my window looking out at the city lights, wants to reach back through time and tell the woman I was then that she was worth fighting for. I want to tell her that the love she was so afraid of losing wasn't really love at all, and that real love was waiting for her on the other side of her fear. I want to tell her that saying no wouldn't make her a bad mother or grandmother, it would make her a wise one. I want to tell her that her granddaughter needed to see her stand up for herself more than she needed another sacrifice. Most of all, I want to tell her that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she felt, and deserving of so much more than she was accepting. But I can't reach back through time to comfort that woman. All I can do is share our story and hope that it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is standing in their own doorway, listening to their own heartbreak, wondering if this is all there is. Someone who is giving until they disappear, loving until they're invisible, helping until they're used up. Someone who needs to know that it's not too late to change, not too late to choose themselves, not too late to demand the respect and care they've been giving everyone else. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like this? Have you watched someone you love be taken advantage of by family members who should know better? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you hope for change, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them, people who are still standing in their own doorways, afraid to step into the light of their own worth. Together, we can remind each other that love should lift us up, not tear us down. That family should be a source of support, not exploitation. That it's never too late to write a new ending to our stories. Thank you for listening to mine.